Tens of thousands of years ago, the land we now know as the Sahara Desert was a vibrant, lush savanna. But as global climate patterns shifted, the rains vanished, the lakes dried up, and the vibrant grasslands rapidly withered into an ocean of inhospitable sand. As this harsh desert expanded across North Africa, it acted like a massive geological funnel. Desperate families of nomadic hunter-gatherers had to retreat, pushed relentlessly toward the one remaining source of water, a single, winding green lifeline cutting through the stone. That lifeline was the Nile. Every year, fed by distant monsoons, the river predictably overflowed its banks. When the waters receded, they left behind a thick, incredibly rich layer of black silt. The ancient Egyptians would call this soil Kemet, the Black Land. For the wandering tribes forced to the river's edge, this silt offered a radically different way to live. Instead of spending every waking hour chasing migrating antelope or gathering wild fruits, they realized they could drop seeds into the black mud, wait for the harvest, and stay exactly where they were. The simple act of settling by the water to harvest that dark earth provided a reliable calorie source in a barren world. That survival mechanism provided the foundation for the most stable empire in human history. When you farm a river valley this fertile, the math of human survival changes. A single farmer working the Nile's banks can produce much more food than his own family needs to survive. This diagram illustrates the mechanics of agricultural surplus. One farmer working the Nile generates a massive stack of excess grain. In an early society, those extra calories function as raw economic currency. With basic survival needs covered by the excess grain, a large portion of the community is freed from the daily grind of food production. The surplus calories power new specialized roles. People can spend their days crafting pottery, inventing written languages, planning architecture, or studying the stars. By roughly 6000 BCE, we see the physical results of this specialization. Distinct, stable villages of mud brick and reeds cluster tightly along the river's winding path. The towering temples, the complex hieroglyphs, and the entire structure of Egyptian high culture grew directly out of the caloric math of river farmers mastering the flood cycle. Eventually, those scattered farming villages joined together. By combining Upper and Lower Egypt under a single centralized state, early rulers gained the ability to coordinate and collect the entire agricultural output of the Nile Valley. This massive accumulation of wealth paid for immense public works, like the Old Kingdom pyramids. Contrary to popular modern myths, these structures were not built by armies of enslaved people driven by whips. The true economic engine was far more sophisticated. Everyday Egyptian farmers paid their taxes to the pharaoh in the form of their surplus grain. The state then redistributed that same grain to feed the architects, engineers, and laborers. The construction schedule was entirely dictated by the river. During the annual flood season, the farmlands were submerged and impossible to work, so those idle farmers were hired by the state as a paid labor force to cut and haul stone. If you look at this photograph of the Giza Plateau, you can see how closely the pyramids sit to the low-lying, marshy floodplains. The monuments and the mud are inextricably linked. While the pyramids served as royal tombs, structurally they are massive stone receipts. They stand as a permanent record of agricultural surplus and the highly predictable timing of the Nile's flood. Yet this incredible engine had a fatal vulnerability. The entire Egyptian state was completely reliant on a single, uncontrollable ecological mechanism. When global climate patterns shifted, the seasonal rains faltered, and the Nile failed to rise. Historians call these chaotic eras the intermediate periods, times when cracked, dry fields brought immediate famine. Without a steady flow of grain, the pharaoh could not pay builders, sustain the priests, or feed the people. Centralized power dissolved, regional governors turned on each other, and the unified society splintered. Paradoxically, when the rains returned and the flood stabilized, Egypt faced a different kind of threat. Restored harvests meant restored wealth, and that abundance made the Nile Delta an incredibly tempting target for expanding foreign empires. Century after century, outsiders marched in. The Hyksos, the Nubians, the Persians, and eventually the Greeks under Alexander the Great. They didn't come to destroy Egyptian culture. They came to capture the agricultural engine for themselves. The black silt was Egypt's most potent resource. It produced the consistent harvests that built empires, while simultaneously drawing the covetous gaze of every major power in the ancient world. The final attempt to maintain an independent Egypt fell to Cleopatra. She used every diplomatic and military tool at her disposal to hold off the aggressively expanding Roman Republic. When Roman legions finally arrived, they were entirely indifferent to the romance of the pharaohs or the ancient gods. They saw Egypt through the cold lens of pure economics. Augustus Caesar had a massive logistical problem to solve. The city of Rome was overflowing with citizens, and his sprawling legions required millions of tons of grain every year just to avoid starvation and mutiny. By 30 BCE, following Cleopatra's death, Augustus Caesar absorbed the territory. Egypt was stripped of its sovereignty and transformed strictly into a province designed to function as the imperial breadbasket. The 3,000-year reign of the pharaohs collapsed because their land was simply too productive. The Nile's staggering agricultural output was desperately needed to feed a foreign capital across the Mediterranean Sea. Under Roman rule, the elite world of ancient Egypt slowly faded away. The great temples fell silent, the hieroglyphs became unreadable, and the golden death masks were buried under layers of sand. The death of the political elite did not mean the death of the Egyptian people. Down by the water's edge, the daily rhythm of the common laborer remained exactly the same. Century after century, regardless of whether the ruler in the capital was a native king, a Greek queen, or a Roman emperor, the farmers watched the river rise. They waited for the waters to recede, and they planted their seeds in the dark silt. The Nile's history survived the fall of every pharaoh. It continues today in the quiet, unbroken cycle of the planting and harvest, a human resilience that remained constant for 3,000